Hi all, this is a round 1 game from the European Cup. It was the Armenia versus Romania match, one of the 2 decisive wins in Armenia's favour. Sargissian, playing white, played d4 and his opponent Lupulescu, representing Romania, played knight f6. After c4 g6 and knight c3, Black played now d5, which is the Gruenfeld defence. So in the Gruenfeld defence, Black is encouraging White to set up a centre, which Black can later attack. So the Finch-Churchill bishop is pressurising d4, and typically in the Gruenfeld, Black strikes at White's centre with c5 later. White played down bishop c4, and Black castled, and White played now knight e2. In my own experience, and probably other people's experiences, playing white in the Gruenfeld can be very tricky because it's a big responsibility to take care of your centre. Sometimes it seems as though you're putting your pieces in very passive squares. After c5, White protects that d4 square with bishop e3, but Black can naturally carry on increasing the pressure on the d4 square. And also it seems very elegant the way the Black pieces are often coordinating on that d4 square. If White plays d5, which is not a theory move, then Black can just play knight e5 here. After castles, Black played bishop d7, and White now played rook b1, so at least there's some compensatory factor in terms of this pressure on the b file. Queen c7, and now bishop d3, so the bishop is no longer in pre, or Black threatening something like cd and knight d4, attacking that bishop. So White's secure for the moment. Black now played rook ad8, so again the d4 square is being indirectly pressured. After queen c2, Black played now knight a5, and White's bishop is threatened actually to be trapped now with c4, so White has to do something about this. If he moves the knight on g3 to leave a gap for the bishop to go back, Black might intensify that d4 pressure, and there's one less defender on it. Instead, now White plays something extremely radical. It transforms this whole notion that White has to defend the centre into something completely different now. He captures away from the centre with d6 c5, and now he plays c4, depriving Black of the c4 square, but also reinforcing the d5 square as a fantastic knight outpost. After knight c6, knight f4, the knight heads for that knight outpost, and bishop c8, knight d5 gained the tempo on Black's queen. And now we see an absolutely remarkable idea. White's pawns currently aren't the greatest because they're doubled in theory, isolated here, but White now plays from massive pawn centre with f4, and after e6 simply leaves the knight on d5 to be captured, dynamically sacrificing a whole piece for 2 big passed pawns in the centre, or potentially a lot of passed pawns. So here White has created a very interesting position, these massive pawns for the piece. After bishop f3, White's strengthening these 2 pawns, and queen e8, he plays queen b3. So we see this b file pressure, but also there's an important point of securing the bishop on e3 to stop any cheapos like knight takes d5 and this pin on this pawn. So queen b3 is another securing move. Black now tries to undermine and blockade White's centre pawns by playing g5, so it's a radical pawn sack idea. White now played, instead of f takes g5, which, let's have a quick look at fg5, knight g6, Black has very nice control of the e5 square here, and maybe it's still better for White though after queen e3, knight e5, but it isn't as good as the game. In the game, White kept usefully that pawn, that f pawn, by playing f5, because there's a lot of menacing threats in some variations of f6 trapping the bishop, as we're going to see later. These become key. After h6 g4, White now also threatens to try and rip open this H file, maybe move his king and bring the rook to the attack. So black's passive at the moment, and white's rerouting the knight to go to e5. So this rerouting manoeuvre is interesting to illustrate. So the knight's going like this to get to e5. So knight f6, bishop f2, knight d7. Now white played queen a3, attacking that a7 pawn, so there's still some queenside pressure here to deal with. And now goes for the h file, making that very dangerous for black. So this is a very useful resource and road to keep in mind now for the attack. After bishop g3, knight e5, black's achieved that seemingly comfortable blockade to hold the position. But white now plays a brilliant move, which computers underestimate. Its idea is even to sacrifice the exchange to maintain pressure across the board on f6. Because if this f6 pressure results in the bishop going back, then f6 is going to be a killer move, trapping it. Or rook h1 is going to be a dangerous attack. So we see the exchange sacrifice for a lot of pressure now on black's king now, indirectly. Black played king g7 here. After rook h1, there's very dangerous threats now. For example, let's say bishop d7 as an example, just e5, and the bishop is virtually pinned because the queen would then swing across and then mate. So this is incredible pressure on the black king position. So black played queen b5, but it still allowed this e5, embarrassingly getting that bishop. So white is now clearly better, with still some passed pawns in the centre. And now played another beautiful continuation coming up. He played, after a3 and rook g7, first of all he intensified the pressure on f6. So black's very, very passive now, with much less counterplay than before. And here he sacrificed the pawn with c6 to vacate the d4 square for the bishop, to reinforce the attack on f6. And if f6 falls, then g5 is going to fall, and also these passed pawns will be very dangerous. So after bishop d7, white took that exchange, and now is much better, and his bishop's coming in for the attack as well, coordinating with the rook. And this was becoming absolutely hopeless for white now. Another exchange attack, because these result in two massive passed pawns. It wasn't taken, so white gets to the 7th rank, and here's black's had enough. So let's have a quick overview and summary of this game. So it was a Gruenfeld defence, but instead of white passively maintaining the centre, white captured away from the centre at critical moments and used the d5 square innovatively to get a big central position. He didn't play fg, which would have been materialistic. That f pawn is pivotal for the attack and the pressure on the black king. And here we see an amazing exchange set with rook b6 inviting knight c4. It does lift the blockade of that knight on e5 and also intensifies the pressure. So e5, and black was in trouble now, just clear trouble without much compensation, and this was just now hopeless. So it was a brilliantly played game by white, who transformed the Gruenfeld variation into something not passive but very, very aggressive. I hope you enjoyed that, and you may consider playing yourself against the Gruenfeld like this game. Thanks very much, and see you on YouTube.